This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
This is part 2 of a 2-part conversation with Eric Fogg of the Reconsider podcast on the great movie Mad Max Fury Road. I would highly suggest you go back and listen to part 1, which is available on beyondthebigscreen.com and in your podcatcher. Listening to part 1 will really give you a good setup to what we're talking about today. I want to thank Eric so much for his really awesome insights and for all of his other podcasts that he's done with us on Beyond the Big Screen. You can learn more about Eric's great podcast, Reconsider, by looking in the show notes. If you have a second, I would very much love your Apple Podcast reviews. They really go a long way to help me know what you like about the show, what I could do better, and it helps spread the word of Beyond the Big Screen. If you want to get in contact, you can search on all sorts of social medias for A2Z History Page, and you can also email me at steve@a2zhistorypage.com. Enjoy this part 2 of Mad Max Fury Road. Yeah, and that plays into... We don't really... Nux is kind of like a side character who's almost like comic relief in the movie, and he's kind of ridiculous, really, but then he comes along, and after all that brainwashing, he's basically been brainwashed to since he was a baby to be a soldier of Joe's, like completely unquestioning, and then we see that it is innate to humanity to see what's wrong with what Joe is doing, and Nux comes around to seeing that it's not right what Joe is doing, and what the civilization, the version of civilization that Joe's created is not right. And Nux is kind of the person who we see who gets deprogrammed to it.
The war boys are the encapsulation of toxic masculinity, right? They're violent. They fight each other. They fight everyone, right? They want to fight everybody. And what's interesting is they're not at all sexualized, but they live these very short lives. They're called half-lives, right? Because they're all like irradiated. But they are toxic masculinity encapsulated into a thing, like pressed through a squeezer. A couple things, one of the interesting things about them is that it doesn't even help them, right? So one of the messages that George Miller is telling us is that these guys are participating in toxic masculine behaviors because they have been programmed, and it hurts them too, right? And this is one of the reasons I love this movie so much, is that this isn't like, yes, this, like, because there are different ways of looking at the patriarchy. One of them is that men perpetuate the patriarchy because it helps them at the expense of women. So men are trash, right? There are quote, men are trash feminists out there. It's a great, and like the men are trash feminism, really bad marketing, right? Because it's a great way to get all these powerful people against you, right? Because like, I don't think I'm trash. I don't think you're trash. You probably don't think you're trash. I think I'm a good person. So when someone's like, all men are trash, I'm like, okay, I don't want to deal with you. But George Miller's version of feminism that he's talking about here is one in which men are subconsciously or unconsciously perpetuating the patriarchy, and it hurts them. And so feminism is good for men, is what George Miller is saying. And so how is Nux deprogrammed? He's deprogrammed by Capable, who's like the only wife whose name I can remember. I think Toast the Knowing is another one. Like, they have weird names. But Capable, the Dag is another one. But Capable deprograms him with like love and affection and comfort and all these things that he was clearly missing. Like, he probably never was raised by a mother. But it's not through violence or resistance or pushing back against him that she deprograms him. It's through compassion that she deprograms him, and showing him a better way that she deprograms him. And I think that's a really powerful message, because then Nux becomes a critical ally of Furiosa.
That's what I think that this movie did very interestingly, because I think, like, on the surface, when you hear a lot of people out there, I'm probably one of them, when you start hearing these words of like feminism and toxic masculinity and the patriarchy and like a lot of the buzzwords that if you saw them like hashtagged on Twitter, like, you know, you'd get a screen of like people screaming at each other. But I think that George Miller really plays this as that it's a lot of like totalitarianism and versus individuality and, you know, like essentially good versus evil, like really boiled down to its most essentials. And somebody who's creating like a really bad version of society versus people who are trying to create something maybe a little better. And Max is just kind of our tool to get us there. And he's probably, like you said, and it's something that I didn't really think of, he's never going to be able to live in either one of these. But he's kind of the medium that gets us in between them.
Exactly. I mean, the way that Miller tips his hat to Max is that this couldn't have happened without Max, right? And in particular, Max has his own kind of feminist moment, right? Where you know, when we've run away for a long time, right? We're running. You know, it's one of the things that's absurd about this movie. It's like 98% of the movie is driving one direction, then driving the other. It's like, how on earth is that interesting, right? But it manages to be thrilling. But when we're as far away from the Citadel as we get, the many mothers and the wives and Furiosa are on these bikes, these like cool dirt bikes, and they're gonna try to cross hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of the salt sea. Probably thousands, because the implication is that was the ocean, and the ocean's gone, right? Which is horrifying. But and they don't know what's on the other side. Now, Max, he says, guys, there's nothing out there. There's nothing for you there. So what's the symbolism here? It's that trying to run away from this, you know, you have all these, they are exclusively women at this point because Max ain't going with them because Max knows there's nothing out there. And so this group of women trying to run away from this horrible patriarchal system. And Max says, you can't run, right? Symbolically, he says, you can't run. And they're like, where the heck are we going to go? And he points to the Citadel on his map, right? So what is he saying? Your only option, if you want peace and justice and freedom and to survive doing it, you have to tear it all down. You can't run away from it. You have to tear it down. And by the way, I'm going to help you. And I think that is like, that's that's like the most important feminist moment in this movie is George Miller is saying like, you can't escape it. You have to destroy it.
Also of confronting your demons, that running is not going to be the answer, and it probably never will be the answer. It's that they have to turn it around. And it's ironic because Max, they show throughout the whole movie is him having these flashbacks to the little girl, which we presume, I guess, is his daughter, or that somehow died along the way. He never confronts his demons, but he's going to help these people confront his demons. Wow, I mean, just talking and having a chance to talk it through, there is a lot going on with this movie.
It keeps getting deeper the more you start to peel at stuff. And yes, you're absolutely right that Max never. Well, here's what's interesting is like I always figured that it's at the end of the movie that he finally finds like a form of redemption. Right, and you have that very redeeming music, and he does that thing where he like gives the thumb up while kind of like grimacing a little bit as Furiosa is being lifted, and we need to of course talk about that scene because it's so good, but yeah, it was his daughter so if you see the first Mad Max, his daughter and wife are killed by Toe Cutter's gang. And fun trivia, so Hugh Canesburn, rest in peace, the guy who played Immortan Joe, also played Toe Cutter. So like 30 years ago, he played this much younger character who was this like weird, going insane, very dramatic dude who ran a motorcycle gang and Max ends up killing him. You know, Max always kills the bad guy, right? Except in this movie. Right? And which is cool because Furiosa kills the bad guy in this one, which of course, had Max killed him, like I would have been very sad about that. But so Hugh Cain's Byrne plays Immortan Joe as well, and you see all these like visual ties back. But you know, so now we've realized we can't run. We have to go back and fight. And I just love this moment when like the truck is just like going back. Because what's interesting is that Joe had like more or less given up. Why? It's because so while they're running away, I just looked up. It's Angarad, the splendid Angarad is the name of the blonde wife. Not like the wafy white-haired wife, but like the blonde wife who's kind of like the voice of the rest of them. She puts herself between Immortan Joe's gun and Max to save, or maybe Furiosa. I forget who's driving at the time because they switch. And she puts herself between them and knows that he's not willing to kill her. But oops, she falls off and is crushed underneath the wheels of Joe's vehicle.
Oh, and was she the one who was very pregnant?
Exactly. And so he tries to get it's called the biomechanic, right? So the closest thing they have to a surgeon is basically a mechanic who just cuts people instead of metal. And he pulls the baby out, and the baby died. The baby didn't make it. And I remember Rictus Erectus saying, "I had a baby brother, and he was perfect in every way." Right? So even Rictus Erectus, even these two sons, like they don't even want power. They want to perpetuate the system, right? They were hoping they're so brainwashed that like they don't mind being number two. Yeah, they wanted this perfect baby boy to lead them into the future. And again, that's like such an important point, is that like the only person who is like selfishly evil, or the only people who are selfishly evil are like, lead these three towns. Cause I forget the name of the guy who runs Gastown, but he's like obese, morbidly obese, disgusting human. But, anyway, I'll wrap this point up. So she dies, the baby dies, and Joe is inconsolable. So he's on his knees wailing and singing this like almost paean, mourning the loss of essentially his son. And then you have this almost comical moment where someone's like standing on this pole. He's like, "Boss!" And Joe looks up, right? They're going for the Citadel. It's undefended. And so then everyone rallies up and the chase is back on, right? And now we're fighting again, except this time, what's changed? The good guys have new allies, the Many Mothers, the Vuvolini, and the bad guys have more of, it's a bigger group now because they've been able to assemble all of the folks from Gastown and Bullet Farm. One last thing I want to point out about just all the crazy details in this movie. The War Boys are from the Citadel. They're painted white, and they're great drivers, but they essentially like fight. They fight with these like very makeshift weapons. The guys from Gastown, where they refine fuel, they fight with flamethrowers. Why? Because fuel is readily available, and the guys from Bullet Farm fight with guns. Right. And so they nail these details everywhere that, like, of course, the guys from Gastown have flamethrowers because that's the thing that's readily available to turn into a weapon is like liquid fuel. And these like details, I mean, we could do a show just about like the crazy world building of this movie. But anyway, now we're at this point where we're going back and the chase is back on.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. So the chase is back on, and they're heading back towards the Citadel, and there's a series of fights. Do you think maybe because there's a lot of fun stuff. And let's just go right to how a Mortan Joe is killed. And then we can head to the Citadel.
Yeah.
Because I had some thoughts about that, but we have to tell how. One thing that probably ties into that is that a Mortan Joe is obviously of the three leaders of the towns, Gastown, Bullet Farm, and the Citadel, Joe, they're all horrifically unhealthy. Maybe the Bullet Farmer is the one who's maybe the most healthy. But they're all horrifically unhealthy. And Mortan Joe is clearly, probably has one foot in the grave, and he has to wear a breathing apparatus that keeps him going. And he has like a plexiglass armor that like basically keeps his insides from falling out. So that kind of plays into how Joe meets his ending. Like I said, probably we should say this throughout the whole movie. This is the type of movie you should probably watch it, listen to this, watch it a couple of times, read some more, watch it, and you'll get a lot more out of the movie. But so let's go on and find out how Joe is not so immortan, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, and one of the cool little details about the movie is that you can tell language is evolving. Right, it's been long enough that language is starting to evolve. So he's not the immortal Joe; he's a Mortan Joe. Why? Because language evolves.
Yeah.
Similarly, the names of the wives. Ready? Toast the knowing, the splendid Angarad, capable, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? It's a virtue name like hope or charity. The Dag, and Cheeto the fragile, right? And so part of the like absurdity of this world is like all the little bits that they've like picked from the old world and have been twisted. By time.
I think, like you said, like as a lot of these names reflect, it's probably not the Harvard professors who are surviving through this. I mean, let's be honest.
Exactly.
It's the people who are like a Mortan Joe when in the who played the actor played a motorcycle gang leader. Like those are the people who are probably going to last through some sort of major cataclysm.
Exactly. So Joe is there's a point in which they're going back through this like valley. Where we'd already had a fight with the guys on the dirt bikes, right? And at the beginning, so we're going back through the valley, and Joe has managed to get ahead of the rig for all sorts of reasons, and he's trying to box the rig in, right? And one of the important things here is he can't just the whole reason he can't just wreck the rig is because the wives are on there and he needs them, right? So that's like a fundamental constraint that makes this fight interesting, because otherwise he'd just be like just running off the road. Right, but the wives are on there. And so he's trying to get the wives off of the rig into friendly vehicles so that he can then run the rig off. Now, he probably wants to keep the rig, but most importantly, must destroy Furiosa because she dared defy him. And anyway, long story short is, so he's in front of it, the rig is slowed down, and because of that boxing in, everyone's in a lot of trouble at this point. Right, because they're going to get swarmed by all these people who are like, called these guys called polecats, who are like leaning down onto the thing and jumping on the rig and fighting people. And the many mothers are all dead. They're all dead at this point. And Furiosa has been shot. Right, she's got a bullet wound in her chest, and as we learn later, a lung is collapsing, and she's like, well, I'm not going to make it. Right? I'm not going to make it. And you can see like her face is pale and her eyes are red. And she crawls along Joe's rig. Not his rig, his car. It's really a car. And he looks out the window and just growls this primal scream. And she uses her, and there's like a cool little symbolism in this that I don't think is so important, but she uses her prosthetic to grab onto his mask and tear it off and lets the prosthetic go. And the mask and the prosthetic both go under the wheel and get crushed. And you can see there's a lot of blood. So it's like, what exactly killed Joe? Was it a lack of the respirator? Probably. Was it damaged? Like probably his jaw got torn off kind of thing during this as well. But yeah, she uses, one of the things that's important is without her, as we learned earlier, without her prosthetic, she's fine. Without his, he's dead. And he does. And it's not quite over yet, but he's gone, and these guys need to keep fighting. But what they're able to do is they're able to climb into Joe's truck or Joe's car. After and Nux stays behind in the war rig. And one of the things about Nux is Nux sacrifices himself. He twists the war rig to run through, like there's this really small gap. He throws the wheel, and he's reaching out and he says, "Witness me," which is like a theme of this movie, right? Because there's this idea that like you need to be seen doing something heroic to go to Valhalla. And he's let go of that religion now. But Nux knows that, we see earlier that Nux has like really bad cancer on his throat that's like suffocating him and killing him. And so he knows he doesn't have much time left. And he looks out at Capable, who's the woman who, again, there's not a sexual tension between them. But there's clearly like some, like there's love and affection between them because she saved him. And he says, "Witness me," to her, throws the wheel. And he'd always been looking for something, like a reason to give his life meaning. And he was looking for it through death, and he has it, right? He finally has it by being the one who stays behind, and it gets destroyed by this angry patriarchy trying to fight these guys. Also a symbol, right, about choices that men can make in these systems. He does that. He basically causes this like big rock collapse and all the bad guys die. And the only car that's left is the one full of the heroes that remain.
That was kind of a great way to wrap up Nux too, is that he found redemption, that he was able to, be completely absorbed into this evil system, and then he finds a way to redeem himself and save and allow them to move forward. Because it was really like at this point, I think that it was kind of screaming for one of the good guys to die at that point, and I think that was a good one to start, because then basically the movie wraps up at that point. They go back to the Citadel, so maybe let's talk about at the Citadel.
The first time I saw it, I had trouble with the Citadel scene, and I had to think about it more. And like the rest of the movie was so genius that I gave Miller the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, I'm sure this is genius, but I don't know why yet. And the reason it didn't feel genius at all was that like the enemy of the Citadel, the ultimate enemy of the Citadel, shows up, and they just let her run it now. So why was that? And what happens is, when they show up, everyone's really tense. They're like, "Where's Joe?" And Max, doing his best, pulls out Joe's body and just tosses it on the ground. And everyone's like, right? He's dead. And Joe, of course, was always a symbol, right? A symbol that Joe promised these rewards in the afterlife to people. Right. And so in the movie, he's like the cult falls apart without him. Right. Because if he's dead, what?
Yeah. What's the point of all this?
What's the point of all this? What are we doing? What are we fighting for? And you have this group of people who's in desperate need of a leader, and they all respect Furiosa. And so I think, it's a little bit quick, but what's interesting is like the old guys don't want to do this, but it's these young kids. You see this like young kid, this young war boy pull the lever to let her up. And you have all these people chanting, "Let her up, let her up." And why is that? And it's because when the wool is no longer over people's eyes, they're able to see how toxic and destructive this whole thing was. And again, it's very accelerated. And the same thing is true, and this is where it becomes a symbol that when we individually can see that the promises of these oppressive systems are not real, right? Are false promises, and that wool is pulled off of our eyes, and that and that they're fragile, right? These systems only persist because we participate in them. And that's what happened, is that everyone realized at once in this movie that the promises were false. There is no Valhalla, or at least Joe can't get you there. And and that it doesn't have to be this way. We can choose not to participate in it. Nobody's making us. And the ultimate lesson of this is that the Citadel never needed Joe. Joe needed the Citadel, right? We don't need an oppressive system. We don't need the patriarchy in this case. The patriarchy needs us. And we can choose to let it go and be freer for it.
I think an interesting part of the ending, too, is we don't know what's going to happen. We assume that it's going to be kumbaya and that the new management's going to come in, but we don't know enough about Furiosa to say she obviously has good in her, but like everybody has bad. She could come in and take this system over and mold it to oppression for herself. We don't have any like instant gratification that everything's going to be great at the end and that they're going to rebuild society and everything's going to be wonderful.
That's true.
That's kind of what we're hoping for, but it's very easily that our hopes could be dashed.
Yeah. It is a common thing in it is the common thread at the end of these 3 post-apocalyptic Mad Max movies, that there's hope but not certainty. And I think that's important in order to be able to tell the Mad Max story over and over and over. That it's never, and I think that's actually important, it's never over, right? The end of history will not come. There will be more bad guys. There will be more Immortans. There will be more Lord Humonguses, right? And I think I think it's important to not quite have a happily ever after story, because I think it would do a great disservice to the arc of history in which we have always grappled with injustice. Or sorry, there's always been injustice, and at times we've had the courage to grapple with it. At times not, but at times we've had the courage to grapple with it. And we have, this particular actor or this particular conduit of injustice has been defeated, but the world ain't set to rights yet, right? It never has been, and it may never.
Yeah, I think it's so ingrained in us as, coming from the Enlightenment ideal in America, and that there's the march of progress. Things get better. But that's really, that narrative is really false. And it's the idea that things very well can get worse, or they can be the same, or they can be different. And I did like how they left a question mark over that it wasn't happily ever after, that it was, we don't know what's going to happen. And we don't see her actually, of Imperator Furiosa, go into the Citadel and clean house. And I like how they ended it.
Yeah. And you just have Max giving his grimacing thumbs up, mostly because he's only grimacing because he's like, please leave me out of this. Let me go. Because I just want to go back to being a nomad and surviving. And it's the, it's and for Max, to bring it back to him, it's that common story in these 3 movies is he at first is inadvertently helping people, and then he chooses to help people. He's back in touch with his human self, haunted by the people that he couldn't save, right, from Toe Cutter. And once he's helped them, once he's done everything that he can, right, and what does he contribute to this? Well, he literally contributes blood and sweat. He contributes some knowledge. He contributes some good fighting. Turns out Furiosa is a better shot than he is, right? Remember that moment where he hands over the sniper rifle?
Yeah.
But he's also really good at setting traps. So we see that moment where he walks off into the night and you see this big explosion, right? And so he has all these skills and knowledge and like hyper power blood cells, right? High octane blood that he contributes to the cause. And then he's out, and it is, that was always true in the other movies, but in this movie more than ever, he's not really the main character. And it's the first time where he doesn't kill the bad guy. And I think that was, I mean, it was critical that that be true. But I think it's also, you know, I think it's meant to be inspiration that, you know, seeing Nux and seeing Max do the right thing for its own sake and then let go of it. Right? Now, Nux lets go of his own life, but he lets go of seeing, you know, the people that he's helping ever again. Right? He never, like, and it's such a, you know, I think it's such a, if you look at like these examples of toxic masculinity, you see men do stuff for women with an expectation of some sort of return, often sexual. Right? Like, hey, I keep holding the door for you. I keep doing all these nice things for you. Why won't you go on a date with me? Right? And women hate that, right? Then they should, because I think it's a lesson to all of us, regardless of our gender, right? That if you're going to be a good person, let's say a nice guy, right? As much as we don't like that term anymore, but if you're going to be a good person, regardless of the mechanism, you're only being good if you give what you have without an expectation of return. Otherwise, it's a transaction.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, that opens up a whole discussion of if you're being nice, so to speak, for quid pro quo, or are you doing it out of altruism? And it's a hard thing to see, and what motivates people to being decent. Is it transactional, or is it just intrinsically to be a decent human being?
Right. And I think one of the great lessons in this movie about Max is that, again, he goes from being this ultimate form of selfish, where it's like true neutral selfish, right? Like if you think the D&D alignment chart, like lawful versus chaotic, good versus evil, he's a true neutral selfish, where he doesn't want power over others. He just wants what he needs, and then he wants to get the heck out. And it is for Max, it is through being deeply embedded in seeing in with these people and seeing their struggles that his empathy and his humanity, his compassion are renewed. And that is true of all of us as well. It's that when we really end up walking or driving a few miles in someone else's rig, right? Maybe that's I'm talking my way into this, but like drive a few miles in someone else's war rig, right? And you will care much more about, you will understand how they struggle, and you'll care about how they struggle. And it was not through logic. It was not through this convincing or this compassion, the way that Nux was brought around. For Max, it was just that there is this hidden, you know, compassion in him that he forgets, and then he remembers. And yeah, the fact that Max, you know, if you haven't seen other Mad Maxes, you don't know. It's not obvious to you that Mad Max is going to walk back in the desert. Right, but when he doesn't go up, right, I think if you think of this movie as totally standing alone, the fact that he doesn't go up, the fact that he's like, this is not my, you know, this is Furiosa's and the wives, and this is not mine, and it's time for me to step aside and let go. I've contributed what I can. That's what makes him such a gorgeous, like such a wonderful character.
And they never made a cliche romantic between them. It's purely that they have objectives, that at this moment their objectives line up, that they can work together, that there probably was a bond of at least friendship to get them to that point. But now Max is true to character, and he's done. And it's not that they're going to go back and live as king and queen of the Citadel. And
yes,
that was the way to end the movie.
Exactly. One thing I want to point out for everyone who hasn't seen it yet or is going to see it again. So again, Miller had a team of feminist theorists with him that were giving him advice on the script and basically how to not blow it inadvertently, right? One of the things in this movie is that nobody ever talks about Furiosa as a woman. right? And it kind of makes sense, and that seems surprising, but nobody talks about Max as a man, right? They talk about Max as Max. And Furiosa is Furiosa. She's not a woman who happens to be cool. She's someone cool who happens to be a woman. And that's really important, right? Because so often a lot of movies kind of ham-fist this whole like tough woman idea, right? And everyone's like, wow, what a tough woman. She's so tough for a woman. And implying that it's like out of character somehow if you happen to be a woman to be a badass. And even the people that hate Furiosa don't talk about her as a woman, which happens a lot in other action movies when there are women involved, is that the bad guys, and they are sexist, right? They're supposed to be, but they are sexist. But like the movie normalizes this idea that if you're mad at a woman, you are actually like, you emphasize her gender with your vitriol, where that does not happen once in this movie, which I love, right? Even when they're sitting around talking about how much they hate her, and the bullet farmer guy, he pulls out a tooth, which is a bullet, and he says, one shot, clink, for Furiosa, right? She's just Furiosa. And again, same thing with her missing an arm, which again, she probably lost in battle. Nobody's like, wow, she's so powerful for overcoming her disability. Yeah. We should so be it's like, no, she doesn't. Like, the claw is kind of an advantage, right? It's a little like Blade, the South African Blade Runner guy. It's kind of an advantage. And when she doesn't have it, she's fine, right? She kicks ass with that stump. And those two things, the fact that we have this disabled woman that like you look back and nobody mentions either of those things, and nobody leans into like, wow, what a powerful disabled person or powerful woman, I think is important. And it's the kind of crazy irony of this movie is that it shows this society that is like the ultimate form of regressive patriarchy, but in the storytelling, there is this post-patriarchal ideal in which we talk about people as individuals, even if they are women.
Yeah, I think it allowed the characters and the whole society and really every aspect to be viewed in a full 360 way without being cliche or, oh, we have an agenda here for feminists. Right. Let's just pour it on and, make it treacly. And it never did that. And I think that that's what I really, in the end, enjoyed the movie, is that it was a really good movie that had themes that it saw through, and it didn't shove anything down your throat. It did it through the storytelling. Exactly. And it allowed characters who they created to be the characters that they were.
Exactly. I want to leave us with an example, or at least like start wrapping up with an example that seems unrelated, but is important to support this notion I have that George Miller is the ultimate show, don't tell storyteller. And I mentioned that I was going to talk about the Doof Warrior at some point. The guy in red who hangs from the bungee cord and plays this guitar, this flaming guitar, right? And you look at that at first and you're like, this is just the silliest, most over the top, right? Like a little bit of fan service, make it fun, add some heavy metal. Wrong. It matters. And why? Or at least it's part of world building, and why? Well, we got to remember a few things here. So what is this? Like the War Boys, what is their culture? Their culture is toxic masculine, car obsessed, which is a theme in all of Mad Max, right? It's all about, it's all based on these like really car obsessed people who live in Australia, right? They're like, they're real gearheads. They say stuff like "fang it" when they want to go fast. And so you have this toxic masculine, car obsessed Nordic Viking Valhalla cult. Right? So how, so how are they going to go into battle? Well, certainly with a bard, right? Because the Vikings went into battle with bards. And so you've got your bard, playing you into battle the way that the Vikings really had. And given that it's a car cult, how is that going to work? Well, it's going to be this heavy metal car, right? With with this guitar, like you look at that thing and you go, of course they would have it, right? It's not just this add-on. It's something that culture would have and prioritize as part of, and probably that Joe designed as part of building out this cult. Because as we know about religions, they have symbols, they have rituals, they have, clear tenets. They have things like music and, just music. And why is music important in a culture? It's something that, like pervades the entire, all these rituals that people are going through, and adds this layer of, the music in these, like no religion exists without music, right? Except like maybe the Quakers, right? But essentially no religion exists without music. And it's because music is such a powerful bonding agent in human minds, that it would have, that like kind of in retrospect, you probably wouldn't have figured it out on your own, but something would have felt missing had the Doof Warrior not been there, because it makes sense.
I think that the Doof Warrior and his car that was like a 2-story tall contraption of all speakers, and that it was kind of showing in that his guitar was not just a regular guitar. I think they said in production that the thing weighed about 60 kilograms, so like the size of basically an adult person. I think it's to show that Joe was creating a society that was beyond just utility, that this is absurd, that it's transcendent. We're more than just surviving here. We can have this thing that's extravagant.
Yes. There's a lot of symbols of Joe's power and his ability to choose to provide, including like, the levers where he pours the water out at the beginning. And it's all about how he promises. It's all about how he reinforces this promise to people of reward through him.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to stop, because like you said, we could talk about this movie for another week and barely start scratching the surface. I think that if people have other movies that they want us to talk about, there's so many more that are really reach into these bigger themes. Like I think most people at first swing would not see this movie this way, but then when you watch it again, it's like, holy smokes, there's a lot to this movie. Eric, if people want to learn more about your projects and what you have going, how can they find out more about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Quick version, go to reconsidermedia.com or search for the Reconsider podcast. Me and my good friend and much smarter human Xander, we talk about we talk about a lot of contemporary political events, and also a lot of political theory or economic theory to help people kind of break through the BS of partisan narratives that we're surrounded by and better think for themselves. We have a good time most of the time. Sometimes we get really grim. But we come at it with the same passion. Xander and I come at politics with the same passion that Steve and I come at these films with. And with the same kind of depth of trying to pick everything apart and understand it as well as possible.
Well, that's awesome. I want to thank everybody for listening. Eric, thank you for coming on. I know we're going to be doing more of these, so everybody hold on for the next time.
Yeah, for everyone who's like, man, we want to, like, I want Eric Steve to cover my movie. The movies I love best are science fiction. Hands down, I love stuff set in the future, whether it's a dark future or a bright future. We could do Alien. We could do 2001: A Space Odyssey. We could do The Day the Earth Stood Still. I mean, anything along that. So if you guys are pumped about some of those in particular, let us know. And it will probably move a little further up the list because you reached out to us.
All right. That is awesome. And we will talk to you guys next time.
Stay safe, everyone.